Introduction suggests, I'm not an expert on the Houthis or Yemen. Whenever I'm asked to give my remarks concerning what's going on in Syria or in Gaza or in Lebanon, I always say that I have 85 millions of Iranians to take care of. But I do think that it's almost impossible to discuss the Houthis and Yemen, especially in those days, without some remarks about Iran. I'll try to be brief to make more time for the discussion by making some general observations concerning four major issues. One is how I see the main characteristics of the so-called Iran's threat network, the ITN, or the Iran proxy network, or the axis of resistance. So that would be my first part of presentation. Then I'll try to answer the question, what does Iran want since the war in Gaza erupted more than 60 days ago? Then try and answer a little bit how the Iranians are trying to achieve their objectives. And last but not least, I will try to see what role do the Houthis serve within the context of Iran's network of proxies. So I think the number one issue regarding the Iran's network of axis of resistance or of resistance front, one has to remember three main characteristics of this network, which, as you probably know, composes of mainly Shia participants, Hezbollah and the Houthis, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, but also in a way Hamas and the PIJ, who are not Shia, but certainly could be considered as part of this axis of resistance. The first component, the first characteristics of this network is that we have to remember this is not a command and control network. This is a kind of a loose network, coordinated and supported by Iran, but with different components work together to achieve overlapping interests, and I'll refer to that later on. But it's not like a situation in which the Houthi leader in Sana'a, or Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, or Hassan Nasrallah in Beirut are just waiting for a phone call from Tehran by the Revolutionary Guard commander or the Quds Force commander to tell them what to do. That was not the case even when Qasem Soleimani, the former commander of the Quds Force, was still alive. And this is certainly not the situation since January 2020, after Soleimani was assassinated by the Americans. So we have to remember, and that has to do with the Houthis as well, that again, this is a coordinating efforts between different components of this axis of resistance and Iran, but it is not a centralized network of command and control. The Iranians telling them what to do. The second characteristic of this network has to do with interests. And here I would say that while there are certainly overlapping interests between the different components of this axis of resistance, so for example, all of them want to see a new Middle East without the military presence of the United States. Everyone, each and every one of the components of this axis wants Israel to get away from this region. They are all anti-Zionists. They are all anti-Israelis. So they certainly have overlapping interests considering the muqawama, the resistance. But having said that doesn't necessarily mean that there are identical interests between Iran and the different components of this network. So even if we take Hezbollah, for example, which is certainly considered to be the most loyal and most important component of this network for Iran, Hezbollah has to take into consideration not just the interest of Iran, not just the interest of the axis of resistance, it has to take into consideration the interest of Lebanon as well. And that has to do with each and every one of the components. So, for example, if you take the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq. We had several reports, for example, during the ceasefire 2 weeks ago in Gaza, the temporary ceasefire, saying that there were even differences of opinions between the different Iraqi Shia militias concerning the question of whether they should join the ceasefire or not. And there might have been several differences of opinion between Qatar Hezbollah on the one side and other pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, whether they should join the ceasefire or not. And that has to do with the Houthis as well. I'm old enough to remember that a few years ago, the Iranian chief of staff, Bakiri, had a very interesting statement, or I think it was perhaps the naval commander of the Iranian forces, saying Iran wants to establish a naval base in Yemen to exercise the interest of the Islamic Republic of Iran. And then I remember Maggie Mashat, who I think is the head of the political wing of the Houthis, said, look, let me just remind my Iranian friend, the commander of the Iranian Navy, that we in Yemen are against any foreign presence in Yemen. And let me remind my Iranian colleague that Yemen has actually turned into a graveyard for any kind of foreign invasion. So he was very critical of what the Iranians were saying about their interests in Yemen. I'm not saying that that's the case today, but that has to be taken into consideration concerning the different agendas between the components of the axis of resistance and Iran. Last but not least for this part is that we have to remember that this network of Iranian proxies or allies is not based on equal components, meaning there are different levels of Iranian support, different levels of Iranian assistance given to each kind of its proxies or allies. There is different kind of commitment by each and every one of these components towards Iran. So Hezbollah is certainly not Hamas, Hamas is certainly not the Houthis, and the Houthis are certainly not the Shia militias in Iraq. So we have to take that into consideration as well when we discuss, for example, what is the position played by the Houthis within this network. Now, the basic question, I think, over the last few weeks since the war in Gaza erupted concerning Iran is what actually are the Iranian objectives in this stage of the war. Now, I have to say that I don't always believe what the Iranian officials are saying, but this time I have a good, my sense is that we should really believe the Iranian official, for example, Foreign Minister Hossein Amir Abdollahian, who keeps saying, we want a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Now, usually when the Iranians say that after a ceasefire, we'll have to take the thing with a grain of salt, because we know that the Iranians don't usually care about the Palestinians or about anyone else, including their own citizens. But I do think that the Iranians certainly want ceasefire now. They actually wanted ceasefire 4 or 5 or 6 weeks ago, because they want ceasefire before things turn worse when it comes to the position of Hamas in Gaza, before it becomes worse concerning the position of Hezbollah, before the price both Hamas and Hezbollah will have to pay for this war. So what they're trying to do over the last few weeks is to do two things. One is to do their best, both by using diplomatic and political tools. For example, all those tours, all those phone calls carried out by Foreign Minister Abdollahian to put more pressure on the international community, on the Muslim community, on the Arab states to encourage international response, which would put more pressure on Israel to stop its attacks in Gaza. In addition, the Iranians have recognized the fact that one of the main components, one of the main factors which enable Israel to continue its campaign in Gaza is the US support. And therefore, the Iranians are doing their best, mainly through the use of their proxies, to put more pressure on the Americans, for example, through the use of the pro-Iranian Shia militias in Iraq against US bases in Syria and Iraq, to put more pressure on the Americans to show the Americans that they will have to pay a price as well for their continued support for the Israelis. But here is the Iranian dilemma. While they certainly want to achieve ceasefire, while they certainly want Israel to stop its campaign, its military campaign in Gaza before it becomes too risky for both Hamas and Hezbollah, they have to calculate their measures in a way which will not, in which they will not have to pay a heavy price, not themselves, and certainly not Hezbollah, which has always been considered as their #1 strategic arm to deter Israel and to retaliate in case of Israeli military attack against the nuclear facilities in Iran. So this is the Iranian dilemma. But by the way, at this stage, my sense is that the Iranians are still believing that Hamas can deal with Israel mostly by its own. So there is no pressure to engage all the components of this axis of resistance against Israel. They still believe that at the end of the day, the international community, and including the United States, would put pressure on Israel to stop this military campaign before Israel reaches or accomplishes the objectives of the war, meaning neutralizing Hamas' strategic, governmental, and military capabilities. And therefore, they stick to a kind of a gradual road plan since they were of the war. Now, what is this roadmap? The roadmap is a gradual phases of escalation coordinated by Iran. The first stage is in which Hamas is the major partner to deal with Israel, and Hezbollah as a minor player without engaging Hezbollah in a full-scale confrontation with Israel, which could inflict a major price on Hezbollah. So this might be the first stage of escalation. The second stage of escalation, which we actually saw basically from the second or the third week of the war, is trying to engage other components of the pro-Iranian axis of resistance, mainly the Houthis from Yemen, and also the pro-Iranian militias from Iraq, mainly against the US bases in Syria and Iraq, to try and force Israel into dealing with more than one front, and to put more pressure on the US to try and limit the extent of US military support to Israel. The third stage, which we all hope will not come, is the possibility of engaging Hezbollah in a full-scale confrontation with Israel. But then again, the Iranian dilemma will become even bigger, because if Iran has to engage Hezbollah in such a confrontation with Israel, it might face a heavy price, not just for Hamas in Gaza, but also to Hezbollah's strategic capabilities, which again are supposed to be used by Iran in case of Israeli military attack against Iran nuclear capabilities. By the way, there is another possible stage. I would consider it as a theoretical stage, and that might be a stage of Iranian direct response against Israel. I don't think it's very likely. The Iranians are pretty much more inclined to work through proxies. Now, what is the role played by the Houthis within this context? So I would say that in light of the characteristics of this network of Iranian proxies, and in light of the Iranian dilemma, how to try and put more pressure on Israel, how to inflict more heavy price from Israel and the United States, but without risking a major toll both to Iran itself and to Hezbollah, mainly in light of the US military presence in the region, the Houthis actually become an ideal way of by Iran to retaliate and to be used against both Israel and perhaps the United States as well. Why? First of all, because they have strategic capabilities, mainly their missile, the ballistic missile, the drones, their abilities in the Red Sea, which could inflict a heavy price on Israel. And we've seen that. Yes, of course, when compared to to what Hezbollah could do, we have to take into consideration that the Houthis could not inflict Israel with the same amount of damage as compared to Hezbollah. But still, the Houthis can do much damage. The second thing, and that's, I think, is more important, is that the Houthis are certainly less vulnerable to Israeli and even to US response. First of all, the Houthis are far away, and that it doesn't mean, of course, that Israel doesn't have any capability to deal with the Houthis, but certainly this geographical distance makes it more difficult for Israel to respond. The second thing is that Yemen has already been under war for many years now, so it doesn't really have to take into consideration the possibility of military attack, even if there are some military attacks either by Israel or by the United States. Yemen has and the Houthis know how to deal with that after so many years of military pressure. And it has it has to take less into consideration the public opinion inside Yemen. This is not Hezbollah, which has to take into consideration not just what the Iranians want them to do, but also what the Lebanese government, as weak as it is, wants them to do. It doesn't have to take into consideration, like Hezbollah, the public opinion in Lebanon. And that makes the Houthis a very good tool by the Iranians to retaliate to the war in Gaza, to force Israel into dealing with another front without paying a high price, not for Iran and even not for the Houthis itself. In addition, I would say that the war in Gaza actually provided Iran with an opportunity to continue its support and its assistance to the Houthis after almost a year after the agreement signed between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And let me remind everyone that following the deal brokered by the Chinese, and before that with Iraqi mediation between Saudi Arabia and Iran, one of the questions which was raised then what will be the impact of this deal on the Houthis in Yemen? And the question was whether Iran will have to put an end to its support of the Houthis in light of this agreement with Saudi Arabia. By the way, Iran didn't stop its assistance to the Houthis anyway, but certainly the war in Gaza and the fact that the Houthis have become a major player in this war together for the sake of the Palestinians give the excuse needed by Iran to continue its support for the Houthis. And therefore, there is a potential, and I think we could elaborate it further in the discussion. There is a potential for the Houthis to use the war in Gaza in order to prove their potential, not just for the Yemenite people, not just in Yemen itself, but to appear as a major player within this axis of resistance. And I think that when you hear the statements coming from Yemen, when you hear the commitment by the Houthis to the Palestinian issue, you can certainly see how the Houthis are trying to use this opportunity in order to empower themselves as a regional player rather than just a Yemenite player. My last remark would be that I think that one of the questions which still remains is what will happen in case the interests of Iran and the Houthis diverge. Meaning, what will happen in case Iran realizes that that due to what the Houthis have been doing, especially in the Red Sea, it's not just the Houthis who might pay the price, but Iran itself. And if that happens, or if we see some kind of ceasefire in Gaza, and the Houthis decide to continue their attacks against Israel, or to continue their maritime attacks in the Red Sea, then we might see some diverging interests between Iran and the Houthis, because this might force Iran into trying to answer the question whether the interests of Iran in the region, in the new settlement which might appear in the Middle East in the day after the war, whether the Iranian interests are to continue allowing the Houthis attacking Israeli and other targets, or whether that might impose or inflict a heavy price on Iran itself. And then we stay with two main questions. One is what the Iranians are going to do, whether we will see the Iranians will try to convince the Houthis to change their strategy, for example, join a kind of ceasefire because it serves the Iranian interests. And the second question, and that goes back to what I said before, whether the Houthis themselves, in that case, will be ready to accept the new directive from Iran. And that has this will be a major question, because, as I said, the interests right now are similar. We can certainly see intelligence and other support given by Iran to the Houthis, but I'm not sure that in the day after the war, we will still see this kind of identical interest between Iran and the Houthis. The Houthis could certainly turn out to be as a new, a more powerful and also a more problematic component within this axis of resistance. And I'm not sure that the Iranians will be able to deal with that as they want to deal with that right now. I'll put an end to right now, and I will be happy to address any questions of